Hi, welcome to the Little Gardens Homestyle text class of A Course in Miracles. Grab your book and read along with us.
So
Natural.
we're
So
doing
we are,
section 2, chapter 4, the ego and false autonomy.
that's it. It's on page 56. So y'all got your books? I really like chapter 4. It's got one of my favorite sections in it, which we'll do in 2 weeks. This need not be. Okay, the ego and false autonomy. First of all, do we have any questions or comments from last week or anything you've been doing so far? Okay, then let's
I
get
have a
going.
comment from last week, actually, in that yesterday I started listening to a talk which was about yesterday's lesson, but it had a section where there was a reading of that part of section 4 of chapter 4 that we read last week.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't realize it was going to be in it. And I started hearing these words. I was like, that sounds familiar. That's the bit we did last week. And it was overwhelming. It was like I was crying listening to it because it was just like so beautiful and truthful.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
When it was put in another context when you had it reading, when you
Well,
were reading.
it wasn't another context particularly. It was just that it was being read out, and I wasn't reading along in the book or anything. And we're just like, I'd obviously heard the words quite recently, and we'd studied them, and it was like I could really connect to what was being said. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And by the way, Eric, I've thought a couple of times, more than a couple of times, about something you said about one of our workbook lessons where after we had made all kinds of comments, you said something like it's recontextualized, it's reframed. I'm determined to see. That was the lesson. And it was like, well, yeah, that's exactly it. You had just nailed it with just another sentence. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All righty, let's go on the ego and false autonomy. Chapter 4, section 2. Let's have Dale read first.
Okay. It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. Oh, there you go. How'd this happen? In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past, because the past does not matter, and history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge, because knowledge is completely impersonal and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete. I really don't know what to say about that paragraph. After the first sentence, I'm not sure what is being said, to be real candid, so I'm throw it open to somebody else to jump in.
Well, just this time going through, I recognize that when he talks about history, he's saying the history of the ego, and the implication is we're making up the ego right now, right? That's what I got out of that.
Yeah, I mean, he's just saying you're asking questions that they don't really have an answer except in the present.
Uh-huh.
Right? And why ask how it originally was made when you're making it now in the present?
Right.
Right. And he's been establishing from the beginning, like chapter 22, the ego's thought system, the Holy Spirit's ego's thought system is based on lack and how to provide that lack.
Mm-hmm.
And the Holy Spirit's is how to share the abundance.
Right.
You know, we're given strict criteria to say that's ego thinking.
Uh-huh.
But we need to see that we're just repeating that same separation mistake from love.
Right.
As if we had a magic wand that said, love, go disappear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? It's there right now.
Yeah.
Why talk about history? Because we're still making the same mistakes.
Yeah. Right. What's going on right now?
Mhm.
That part about abstraction and perception, I understand it as a standalone, but how does it relate to the earlier part of the paragraph? I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Well, the lesson that relates to this is, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God. He
Uh-huh.
said, when hate and anger are in the mind,
Mhm.
it has very concrete, specific applications,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So that's the idea. I mean, there's a lot to say about what he's talking about, the abstract nature of the mind,
Yeah.
but that's what he's trying to develop in us,
Mm,
to see how we're putting together concepts that don't go together.
and,
Love and fear don't go together. Guilt and innocence don't go together.
mhm,
Attack and love don't go together.
right. So perception is always specific and therefore concrete. So I think we can hold on to that, since, the ego lives in the world of perception. So let's carry on, unless anyone has anything else.
Jan, I was just going to ask a question about that same sentence number 4, that the end of it, I'm not really sure that I understand that either. And examples, now it's talking about knowledge with a small k. So I don't know if this is revelation knowledge or which.
Yeah.
And it says,
Mhm.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think knowledge is usually capitalized.
Okay.
It's just understood as being reality or revelation, or the last step that God takes, which is
Okay.
beyond perception. So I think knowledge in the course, except for the very beginning of the course, where he says, know first that this is fear. After that, I think it's always the hugeness.
Well, here's an example. The insurrection is the reason for your upset.
Yeah, that would be
So what
specific.
That's what he's saying,
Yeah.
right? Is that when you try and understand,
Mhm.
you're going, oh, it's because my wife does this,
Okay.
or it's because of the insurrection. You're trying to get a concrete example when you've just chosen fear
I
and
see.
chosen guilt.
Okay.
And you have to understand your mind's abstract, and you can choose love instead of fear, innocence instead of guilt, instead of coming up with all these examples of
Uh-huh.
why you're upset.
Okay. Because that's always projection.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's just hold on to that as a question, or an open.
Isn't it saying that it's completely impersonal, and by trying to get an example, you're trying to personalize it, are you not?
Yeah. 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 Leanne, would you like to read the next paragraph?
Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both because they are not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this altercation can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical proximity. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There could be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact. Well, I mean, we create an ego for ourselves and for others, and it creates a shitstorm.
That's it.
That's my military take on that paragraph. Sorry to be so simplistic, but yeah, and it happens all day long,
Right.
So it's like egos are in battle with other egos. And, the first step for me personally is to realize that I'm an ego. And so I'm only going to create more ego type events in my life. So I have to, but I can only move where I'm coming from. And then when I move where I'm coming from, I see the world differently and I see people differently. And it totally changes what I experience in this physical world.
Right. So when you are identified with the ego, is when you see others as egos, but that's not who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But it's very easy in our world to believe that we are ego.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
you know, when before everybody else came on, I was telling Jan that we've been going to a church the last couple of weeks, and it's really helped me really actually have a better understanding of the Course of Miracles. And you know, every time they said devil or Satan, I just filled in ego. You know, and there, one thing that stuck out was like, it really helped me. Like, he said, you know, you can tell the difference between God and Satan if it's all about control. And so then I flipped that over and I'm like, oh, if it's, so ego is all about control, wanting to control everything. And for me, that helped me really understand some of the principles in the Course better. And it was just like, another light came on. So I can agree with Eric that sometimes, well, that's not the total example that he gave, but you know, it's been very beneficial to take what we've learned and to reframe it into the real world.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you know, like you said, you can go to church and take what you want and spit out the bones, eat the fish and spit out the bones is what Jan said.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
it's been a fun experiment, but yeah, so that kept it simple for me. If it feels controlling, it's ego.
Yeah.
I might add something. I think it's related to this. We live in a world, but we don't. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
And you can see the somebody as God created them, but they're acting like a jerk many times. What's come up with me and with Leanne recently over the last few months is taking a stand and a belief and a position, but still be continuing to recognize that person is created as God created them, and still loving them, but still taking a position of that's not acceptable.
Right.
To me, that's one of the biggest issues that I've been wrestling with as we go through this work is how do you live in the world, but not really in it?
Right.
I hope that's making sense to somebody.
That's
Oh, I'm sure
exactly-
everybody understands.
That's
That is
exactly how
perfect,
he
yeah.
describes, that's how he describes the teachers of God at the beginning of the manual. You're in the world, but not of it.
Mhm.
So I want to make a study note because the scribing is becoming much more together, much more cohesive. So notice in the second paragraph here, he's building on the idea of abstract thought versus concrete. And what he's having us look at is the distinctions we make between the physical presence of somebody and the thinking of them in our minds.
Mhm.
And what he's saying is that there isn't a big distinction
Right.
between how you think about them and this physical interaction.
Right.
And it's important to get a hold of that
Uh-huh.
so you understand what's really going on is exchanging ideas. The
Mhm.
ego is an idea,
Mhm.
right? And because we make a distinction between physical proximity and our thinking,
Mhm.
we don't really see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So, and at the end of the day, the fact that we're an idea ends the idea of loss and sacrifice.
We are an idea.
So when we're not sharing physical actions or things, when we know I'm giving the idea of a self to
Mhm.
the situation,
Mhm.
that's how we prevent loss.
Mhm.
Because if you put your time here today and you're not putting it somewhere else, you're making a choice.
Mhm.
But when it's an idea and you give it away, you don't lose it.
So the idea, so thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is the physical impact.
Exactly.
So whether you say it out loud or you think it in your mind, you are affecting them.
Or
That's
somebody's,
how I'm reading this. This is like if I look at, so I'm thinking about Leanne was sharing about a person in her life is really difficult. By looking at him with the Holy Spirit in me to the Holy Spirit in you, that's the prayer for their peace and awakening and your own. And then, then whatever physical action you do will come out of that. But I'm thinking when I read this about a situation with a person that I really thought was hurtful to me, like verbally hurtful. And at a certain point, I realized she can't hurt me anymore. I understand that I'm okay, no matter what she says or does. The physical, like the observable action, the observable relationship changed because I shifted out of the part of my mind that could be hurt
Right.
to the
But-
true self.
But the point I was making here is that he's bringing forward this idea, the distinction between the ego's thought system and the Holy
Okay.
Spirit's. And the ego's is based on lack.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to overcome when we engage in our loving relationships, that there's no loss in that.
Yeah.
And the only way that can be true is if I'm giving away ideas instead of physicalizing what the
Mhm.
gift is.
Mm.
Because there's no loss when you give an idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you're up on my screen. You're next, Timothy. So you want to read paragraph 3?
Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego was made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it. There is no, this is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? Notice the narrative arc. Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. But do not forget that the mind need not work this way, even though it does work that way now.
Your comments?
Well, he's just saying this is obvious if you have the chutzpah to take a look at it.
Yeah, that's good. What stood out for the rest of you?
Line 5, surprise is a reasonable response to something that's unfamiliar, but if it occurs all the time, why is surprise there? It's like, I am so good at deluding myself. You know, it's like, I can't believe he's talking about just about every other thought that I have, where I think that I don't know. Anyway, it just kind of amazed me how you can be surprised, how you can have an emotion, and it doesn't have anything to do with what you're actually thinking. You know, like the surprise of the unfamiliar when you're thinking it all the time. And anyway, I'm not.
So just to build on that, I'd say when you understand that the source of any physical illusion that we have is the same, then you can recognize it doesn't matter if it's a riot, it doesn't matter if it's COVID, it doesn't matter if it's a winter snowstorm, it's the same thought. And that's how you see it over and over. If you still think it's every situation an illusion, you're stuck in perception.
It's a really good point.
Yeah. And what I like about that is there's one problem, one solution, right?
Yep.
If I'm upset
Yep.
about anything, I'm thinking I'm separate from God. I'm thinking that I am not good enough. I'm damaged. I'm hopeless. I'm lost. And this
Guilty.
situation is
Yeah.
causing it. Yeah. But there's only one thing, and it's that we've forgotten who we are by identifying with the ego. Oh, okay, it's my turn. Oh, think of the love of animals for their offspring. I always think of my cat when she had kittens. Boy, she just, it's like purring and loving them up. And yeah, they really love their offspring and the need they feel to protect them. That is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego, my offspring, much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made, ego, are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. That whole idea of my creations is a little mysterious. And he said, you really can't understand your creations from here. But if you think, okay, so this is what works for me, is to think of them as my loving thoughts.
Yeah.
My loving thoughts are actually some kind of an entity.
But notice the idea here that he's developing is that you make an ego for everybody else
Yeah.
and for yourself.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
constantly going on.
Right, right.
And we love that.
That's right. I love my ego. I love my persona, my personality, my accomplishments, or I think about my lacks and my needs. All that's ego. Okay.
Seven.
In fact, okay, but I'm going to read 6 again. In fact, your reactions resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are, with love and the need to protect them. The question is not how you respond to your ego, but what you believe you are. Belief is an ego function. And as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self. So that whole idea of belief it's in the world of perception. And the best we can do is to believe right, to have a reflection of God's thinking rather than separate thinking.
You know, he says that in the pamphlet for psychotherapy, that the belief in God really doesn't have any meaning
Uh-huh.
because God is something that's known as an experience. It's way beyond belief.
Yeah.
So that was how do you know what you know, was the idea was justified true belief is how I know what I know. It's how I understand. And it was rooted in your sense data, right? This physical thing is happening, and that's how I understand what's happening.
That's the
Right.
way we generally,
And now I'm justified.
in
basically-
angry and all that.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
justified in attacking because I'm being attacked.
Right. That's the whole illusion.
Yeah.
That's the story that the ego makes of what the world is all about. Attack, counterattack, protection, hiding behind my fort and shooting out the little hole at the others.
So maybe you could comment on this, that it resembles the way in which you will one day react to your real creation. So you're right, he's not dealing with truth or knowledge or creations, he's dealing with perception.
Yeah.
And so he said in this paragraph before, understand that this is how the mind's working, but it doesn't have to work that way.
Right.
So instead of projecting to get rid of something you don't want inside of you, you extend this idea of forgiveness.
Love.
And love and forgiveness.
Yeah.
You extend the idea this is just a mistake, it has no real effects.
Yeah.
And by giving that idea, that's how you realize you have it.
That's how we recognize that we're all the one self.
Right.
Yeah. I know sometimes it's a challenge, that the only way we can do this is by asking Holy Spirit. You know, the workbook lesson that we did yesterday says recognize and release. I call that the catch and release lesson. It's like, catch that negative thought and give it to the Holy Spirit. And then once it's not yours anymore, it's his, then it's replaced with the truth.
Automatically.
Automatically.
See
We
that?
don't have to do that ourselves.
That's the course's 3-step.
Yeah. Yep.
Recognize the real cause
Yeah.
of your upset.
Right.
Be willing to let go of that
Yeah.
idea.
Yep.
And if you do those two things,
Yeah.
a miracle will come to you.
Yeah.
Because that idea of just receiving it as a gift
Mm-hmm.
is important for us to understand. So we don't evaluate whether we should offer forgiveness to somebody. When we
Yeah, right.
recognize it's just a gift.
Yeah. And And if I'm not doing it, I'm hurting myself.
So that's our part, right?
Mhm.
Become aware of the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence by letting go of
Mhm.
what we made up.
Yep. I like sentence 7 in this paragraph. The question is not how you respond to the ego. What? How I respond to the ego? No, but what you believe you are. Like, let go of our belief that we are an ego and a body and open up to another belief. We're still going to be in the world of perception. Laura, are you ready for 5?
I am. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Yet whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that must go together. Your attitudes, even towards this, are necessarily conflicted because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. Well, that just reminds me of today's lessons, that we don't perceive our best interests.
Mm-hmm.
We have no clue what's best for us. And the other, it was early in the text that we, or was it a lesson? So put down your sharp-edged toys. I can't remember where that is in the course, but it reminds me of that as well. But it's
under what is
that's
sin.
well, okay. So that image is so good. Isn't the ego just like a baby or a toddler having a temper tantrum and throwing all its toys on the floor when it can't get what he wants, which is distraction and having us go crazy in details and situations and illusions. So I think that's such a good way to think of the ego.
Yeah, you
And
know
I
what
love-
else? As you're talking about it, it reminded me of the baby when you said distraction. It's like
Yeah,
the ego just wants us to pay attention to the ego all the time.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
definitely.
So
And number
harmless and
5.
helpful.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Timothy.
She says, go ahead.
Harmless and helpful is the key notion here he's going to develop in the rest of this chapter. But part of what
Are we there yet? Oh, I'm sorry.
harmless and helpful go together.
Yeah.
And he's saying that because we think to harm a situation, to be upset about it, is what's going to motivate people to change or give them fear and anger. So what he's building on is what he said at the beginning of chapter 3. The best defense is not to attack another's position, but rather to protect the truth, right? So that's the idea of we think attack is what keeps us safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he means when you want most what would probably hurt you
Mm-hmm.
is to justify your attack. It's
Mhm.
about the insurrection.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
about the politics.
Yeah. It's about what you said or did.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's key to see how we're drawn to that kind of blame
Mm-hmm.
and defending, punishing.
Yeah. Trying to keep it away from us when all that's going on is the projection of our own thoughts of separation bouncing back at us. Boy, big stuff.
Yeah. I also like in 5 how it talks about how we've agreed, but we may not be cognizant of it, to cooperate in this effort.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
That's why we've shown up.
Glad we're here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that paragraph? Eric, could you read 6 for us, please? And feel free to break in at any time because it's a long paragraph and you might have comments along the way that are easier to access.
Okay.
Either way.
Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Maybe stop there. Giving to get, yeah. Yeah, I like that first line about it's only the truly charitable comes from the sense of abundance.
Yeah.
So unless we really feel that we've got nothing to lose, then
Right.
we're going to feel that we're giving something away, aren't we?
Yeah.
And the ego's constantly telling us that we've got things to lose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't do that because you'll lose this.
Mhm. Yeah.
What are you going to get in return if you do that? Constant trying to create some motivation for it's just all nonsense, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
if we've got the abundance, then it doesn't matter what we give away. In actual fact, we can't give away anything that's valuable that's physical anyway. So it doesn't make any sense to be concerned about giving things away, does it?
Yeah.
The next line's a good one, though. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. So we've made up not just our own ego, but everyone else's ego, and then we're desperate to keep those egos alive because they're convincing us that our own ego is real.
Right.
So we like to see other people as horrible, or politicians as crooked and whatever, because that helps to keep our own ideas of ego alive. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence. Just the word stress there, we can all probably relate to feelings of stress at one time or other. For me, the obvious example is feeling stressed in a work situation because of the perception of not being able to do the job well or not being able to do it within the given time scale. But again, that's just perception based on an idea that I'm a body and I'm limited in some way. And is a threat to the ego's existence, or the very existence of this idea that I'm a body, and my self-esteem of being able to do a particular job is under threat. And if I lose that sense of self-esteem, I'm going to be well, what am I going to be?
Yeah,
Who
right.
knows?
You know, we could probably all think about ways in which we build a sense of self-esteem by how good we are about certain things. And therefore, we're temporarily less predatory. We feel a little safer because we're good about something.
Mhm.
But, you know, that could be threatened by somebody else coming along that's even better at that thing, whatever it is.
I think we should maybe look at 7 and see if we can come up with a concrete example, since what we're talking about is abstraction versus concrete here in terms of lack and scarcity. So the
Okay.
whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince that it's real.
Right.
So if you look at your interpersonal relationships, whether it's with a partner, a spouse, or a boss, or a friend, and think about situations where you seem to be in conflict, where they have one set of beliefs, you have another set
Right.
of beliefs, and this seems like what he's trying to get us to do is come back from that concrete physicality,
Mm-hmm.
the concrete proximate
Mm-hmm.
physical, what seems to be causing my upset,
Uh-huh.
and come back and just say, I'm trying to make this unreal self real.
Right.
That diffuses the situation right
Yeah.
away, because you move from what seems very specific and concrete
Mm-hmm.
to this idea I'm dealing with concepts, and they're concepts about who I think I am.
Right.
And I can change who I think I am. I'm not a body, I'm free, I'm still as God created me.
Right.
So
Yep.
it gives us the ability to step back from the physicality, from the concrete, and take a look at the minds and see what is it really the ego trying to do.
Right. Yep. So it said somewhere in here just recently, it's all about who you think you are.
Mhm.
What do you think you are? Well, let's go on to number 7. That would be Dale.
Oh, me?
Did Kathy read?
Kathy,
Did you read, Kathy?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The ego literally lives by comparisons. That's huge when you're dialoguing the ego. Equality is beyond its grasp, and charity becomes impossible. So charity is a real and lasting sense of abundance. That's from paragraph 6, right?
yeah.
The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. So our appetites are really our identity when we're doing that, right?
Mhm.
This is as true of body appetites as it is of so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that it is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. So all our appetites and our ego interaction with our body and the definition that ego gives to the body and what will make it feel better is all made up.
Yeah.
And the reason we're stuck in that is because we think about that all the time, and you have to unlearn it, right? I'm ready.
Good point. All right. Other thoughts about this paragraph? I might have mentioned this before, but in the little book called The Gifts of God, that if you order it on Amazon, the author is listed as Helen Schuckman. But the last part of it, which is also called The Gifts of God, is channeled in the same way as the Course. And there's a line in there that I wish I had it totally memorized, but I'm going to paraphrase it. You've been badly taught by the marketplace. And the idea is we make our relationships be like like a transaction that you get from the marketplace.
Barter and compromise.
Yes, and I want to pay less and get more. Isn't that what it's all about? Hey, I went to that store and I paid less and I got more. And that is, he's saying, that is how we've learned to deal with our relationships.
Yeah, we give stuff that's really not that valuable to us, but somebody else thinks it is. So we give. It's like opening the door for a woman. Man could care less who goes through the window first, but she might see it as an acknowledgement of her value, right? So he's letting you go through the door first instead of something, much more important.
Yeah, and he thinks he's, I know what you used to say.
Just you give a little to get a lot.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Anything else about that paragraph? There's
The,
really,
yeah, the bit that says body appetites are not physical in origin.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day when I've eaten a meal, like a couple of hours later, I get this thought in my mind, which is, do I need to eat something else?
right.
And it's like, if I checked whether I was hungry, then it'd be obvious that the answer was no. But because the word something is in that sentence, then I focus on the word something. So then I'm thinking about what the something should be that I might need to eat. And then once I've thought about what it is I'm potentially going to eat, then I'm much more likely to eat it. So I'm straying into Leanne's area of expertise here. So, but it just seemed quite, it's obvious when you look at it, but in the moment it's less obvious.
Right.
But really, it's the ego just trying to get control, isn't it? That's all that's happening.
No.
That's all. The whole point of it is that the ego wants control. The ego doesn't really care whether you're overweight or not. It just wants to be in control.
It wants to keep your mind busy so you don't go deeper and find love. Yeah. I think it's important sometimes to really remember that sentence.
The bodies
Your
are
body,
are not physical in origin.
that our appetites are not physical in origin, because you hear people say pretty regularly, well, my body told me to do that thing. And if we go along with that way of thinking, we're trapped by our bodies. Now, the Course is telling us your bodily needs are going to be taken care of. That is very clear in chapter 14, other places. Don't worry about it. It's like what Jesus said about consider the lilies of the field. Don't worry about it. They'll be taken care of. When we pay attention to it as if we have to take care of all of this bodily stuff ourselves and let our minds be busy, that's what it means. You're not really thinking. You're not thinking with God. You're off in some dream world.
That really, body appetites are not physical in origin. That really relates to me where this sentence in this paragraph before, its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it's real. So it's always asserting these seeming things that are the problem. But the appetites that seem physical is really about, like it says, just establishing the reality of an ego.
Right.
It's really not about those external things. It's
Right.
just trying to say, I'm real.
Yeah, pay attention to me. Yeah, don't pay attention to love, the joining of all being, God within you and everyone. Don't go there. Hey, pay attention to this. You need to have, something physical.
So I could go back to the mortgage example,
Okay.
right?
I don't remember your
Well,
example, so
so-
go ahead.
So if we were a couple and we're talking about how we're going to handle money,
Yeah.
and you have one idea,
Yeah.
and I have another idea, you think my idea will drive us to the poorhouse, and I think your idea will drive us to the poorhouse, and we're fighting about those things,
Right.
and it seems to be really important because we'll lose the equity in our house And if we can just stop and going, I'm trying to make my ego real, that can diffuse the whole situation.
Right. Yeah.
But
And then we can hear Holy Spirit.
Right.
Yeah. Because he's got a plan for what to do in this physical world. You know, the Holy Spirit is the translator between the two worlds. So he's going to give us an answer about what to do about these physical things.
Yeah.
But we can't hear it as long as we're identified with fear and lack and scarcity, and that is the ego.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I think it's probably Dale's turn.
Eight.
Yeah.
The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. Well, I know I've had in the past, and I'm sure everybody else has, when you're so deep in the ego that you seek out other egos that have a similar misery and have it a pity party, and then it turns into an attack party, and we're all just really miserable.
Yeah.
I've been at that point in my life before.
Dale, can I share a story with you with regard to that?
Sure.
What's his name, the senator from Minnesota that got run out?
I don't remember.
The senator from Minnesota?
Honey, I don't know. You're from Minnesota. I'm not.
Anyways, the senator from Minnesota left. He got run out of office, but he used to write for Saturday Night Live.
Oh, the funny guy. Yeah.
So he used to write for, and they used to do a bit.
Al Franken.
Al
Yeah,
Franken.
They used to do a bit. You know what I hate? Two people get together. You know what I hate? It's when I take a screwdriver and jam it into my ear. Oh yeah, I know it. You know what I hate is when I take a hammer and. So that was Minnesota. We'd get together and talk about how awful the weather was. It's all we'd ever do. I never understood that until I left Minnesota and thought, that's all we do is talk about the weather and how awful it is and how we're going to get through the weather. And it's, you know what I hate is the weather. Yeah.
It's an attempt to bond on the level of the ego.
Yeah. And the level of lack and problems that you could do nothing about.
Mm-hmm. Let's let Dale continue.
All right. Sorry for
Good
that.
story. No.
Oh, that's a good one. It is not free, however, to open the premise to the question, but because the premise is its foundation. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. You know, I went through a lifetime of trying to understand what I felt here with what was in my head. And it wasn't until the last few years that I could finally equate, I think this is what it's saying. I knew there was something different, but I didn't have a clue how to get to it. But that awareness was in there. And I don't think it's just unique to me. I think everybody has a yearning to figure out what it is, but the ego has us so pounded down and rooted in beliefs that are completely false that finding the way out is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Let's see. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. See, that one I have trouble with, that spirit is unaware of the ego. Yet there seems to be conflicting language sometimes in the Course that says God or the spirit or the creator knows everything. I really don't understand that. I've heard it said just God exists, and we need to get in the flow with God. But then there seems to be conflicting language that says that God knows what's going on.
Well,
Well, I think the way to take that is that there's these two concepts of yourself that are mutually exclusive.
yeah.
I mean, you can't be both a body, an ego, and a spirit.
Mm-hmm. And we are spirit. That's what we are. And there's a place in the Course which is telling us how the Christ in us has never changed at all. But the Course itself says God, meaning the spirit, the divinity that has no flaws or lack in it, is not aware of ego. Holy Spirit is. So Holy Spirit is like the translator between these two worlds, is like the bridge.
Okay.
And it's still, the language in the early part of the course is still a little fuzzy. Rather not go into how it's fuzzy, because it'll only confuse you. But if you just keep on going and recognize God, the Father, the ultimate, is completely not dreaming of the pain that we have. However, when we decided to make egos and to go identify with them, God created the Holy Spirit as a bridge. So the Holy Spirit in us has an answer for us.
Well, he's very clear in the second part of the workbook that the Holy Spirit has both knowledge and
Yes.
perception.
Yes.
See, this is how we describe the Trinity. We describe the Trinity as the Creator has no perception.
Yeah.
And then the middle ground is the Holy Spirit, who has both knowledge and perception. But see, this is where the Course moves you off of this sort of metaphysical speculation and asking questions. What he's pointing us to here is the contradictory aims of the ego, where it thinks it's on itself all alone. It thinks it's all alone, and yet it's trying to negotiate its relationships to supposedly get its needs met.
Right.
That's why the ego is crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's both thinks it's totally on its own, and yet it's interacting with the world around it.
Right.
That's insane thinking.
Yeah.
Let's
I
see.
hope that helped.
Yeah, I think you just answered the next 5 questions, both of you. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is usually unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem and ego terms must be delusional. The creations of God do not create myths, although creative effort can be turned to mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition. What it makes is then no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptual and so ambiguous in form and characteristically good and evil in nature that the most benevolent of them is not without fearful connotations. I think you did a real good job, both of you, of addressing that section.
Oh, good.
So that part from sentence 10 on about myths is, I think, addressing Helen and Bill, the psychologists, questions about Jung. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, who opened up the whole area of mythology as a reflection of the way we think in deeper levels.
Yeah.
But note that myths, so whatever it is, I mean, it's like movies, action movies, whatever, they're characteristically good and evil in nature. They're still in the ego's paradigm. They may be pointing to goodness. They may be reflecting goodness will conquer, that kind of a thing. But I don't know why we have this little section about myths, and it's going to continue on.
What I thought of when Dale started talking about what he referred to here, or what I was thinking was referring to, was I'll be still an instant and go home.
Yeah.
He said there's always this part of your mind that really understands your home is not here, and really understands that you're longing for that.
Right. That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
His heart knew.
Yeah. Your heart knew that, and that longing is always there. That's why he's trying to get us off this conceptual, trying to understand things and just get this experience of peace.
Right. Yeah.
And that's when we can just slowly learn.
Right. Thank God. Because when we experience truth, we recognize it's so much more powerful than the goodies that the ego gives us. Leanne, would
Say,
you
I
like
was-
to read? Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
can I just, yeah, sorry, I just want to make one comment. I actually was reading mythology and related that to organized religion in my mind, because it does have that, you know, good and evil
Yes.
and this, and it is very much in the ego, right? Like, I'm not good enough and I need to do this and I need to do what this man says or else I'm going to hell.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I
Fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
Yep.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, religions. I mean, everything has a myth in the greater sense of the word. You know, we have a mythology about our country. We have a mythology about how history works. We have an overarching story, and then we fill it in with details.
That's really good. We
Mhm.
think in terms of narrative,
Yeah.
not just singular thoughts. There's
Yeah.
a whole story.
Right.
Yeah.
So, who's next? Is it Leanne?
Myths and magic are closely associated, since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers of the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some account of the creation and association this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is usually associated with the physical birth, but it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. I think this kind of goes back to what Laura said, basically, is, you know, and the overarching narrative of good and bad and the systems, but our soul is pure love.
Right.
You know, end of story.
Yeah, right.
End of story. And there's nothing that we can or need to do about that.
Yeah.
Other than just the simple awareness of that is the truth, you know, with a capital T.
Yeah. And we can call on it whenever we're tempted to believe in the ego's evil.
Right. And I think, I mean, just, I don't know if this is exactly what it's saying, but when I've believed in myths and magic, for me, it just kept me on the surface of things. It actually kept me from diving deeper into a relationship with spirit itself. You know, when I almost think going to a Unity church for many years made me worse off than I was before, because it felt so surface for me, like the myth and magic of everything that I didn't still need to do anything. And I know I don't, but it kept me from going deeper into my own personal relationship. Because, oh, just think a positive thought. Oh, just, you know, do your affirmations. Well, I mean, those are all good things, but for me, it was just another distraction. And maybe it was just the timing of my life. You know, who knows? You know, everybody's going to experience things in a totally different way. I got a lot of great things out of that experience as well.
Yeah.
But spiritually, I think it kind of maybe delayed me getting to, you know, where I'm at today.
I can relate to that. There's a way by which you can do these affirmations when the ego is like raging and you
Yeah.
need to look at it.
Right. It's like catch and release.
Sort of like,
Catch the ego thought. Look at it and give it to Holy Spirit. Don't sweep it under the rug. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that idea of prior life, prior birth, that was an idea of the Pythagoreans. Back, I mean, Socrates even did this thing of the reason he could teach somebody mathematics was because of a prior existence. So that was really a big part of our, how do you know what you know?
Mm-hmm. You're next, Tim. You're up on 10.
So,
I just mention before
Sure.
we move on, he's talking about the word magic, myths and magic. And I was reading in the manual for teachers, there's a section there about what you should do with magic thoughts.
Right.
And so I'm asking myself, well, what's magic? Because the definition in the course isn't the same as the common definition.
Right.
And what it seems to be is magic is an idea that you can find peace through your own efforts. It's like an illusion of like, I can achieve something on my own and I can create my own destiny without God. That seemed to be what it was saying to me. So relating that to this, this so-called battles for survival. And it's just like, I've got to do it all on my own. I'm using magic, I'm using my own ideas, my own efforts to do it, to get there, to achieve this impossible aim of doing whatever it is than myself. When really the only answer is to turn to God.
That's beautiful, Eric. That's really a good definition of magic.
Well,
Thank you for that.
that was section 17 in the manual. And if you've ever been to Ken Wapnick's workshops, he used his whole blue ball and that whole 2 columns. He based it on that whole section 17. How do you deal with magic or magic thoughts? Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. The ego cannot survive without judgment and is laid aside accordingly. The mind that only has one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. Yep. So, in a way, maybe that relates somewhat to Leanne's point of, well, I'll keep it to like how I could use oneness instead of correction. To take a look at this wrong-mindedness that's based on lack, right? And then just go, oh, well, it's all one, it's all just an illusion. And I'm not really looking at the specific concrete example that's upsetting me. But that's what he's saying. You don't go from wrong-mindedness to one-mindedness. You go from wrong perception, wrong thinking to right perception,
Right.
to right thinking. That just cancels the ego. And then he's saying automatically the answer's there. That was like the lesson yesterday, the course 2-step. Identify the real cause of your upset is your thoughts. 2, be willing to let it go. And then recognize it's already been replaced.
That's just what it's saying.
Yeah.
Yep. So when our mind is in right perception, then we will automatically be directed in our lives. I think this is a really important paragraph, or at least the first sentence, because so many times, and I'm just repeating what you said, so many times people are maybe influenced by Eastern thinking, which is wonderful and a path of its own. That's a wonderful path, but it's not the course. And the course is saying it's not the total union with God that your work is to be done with. Your work is to go from ego thinking to thinking with the Holy Spirit, wrong-minded thinking to right-minded thinking, still in the perceptual realm. When you've got to right-minded thinking, when you recognize that God is in everyone, at all times, however you want to get there, through the lessons, most likely, automatically you'll be directed into that place where God himself will take the last step, bringing us into wholeness or one-mindedness, the one self. God is, and nothing else is. That's not what we're heading. We're heading in that direction, but our only job is to use forgiveness, is to go from wrong to corrected thinking.
Yeah, because his whole point is the separation didn't happen. Knowledge has never been lost in your mind. Knowledge is within you.
Uh-huh.
But, I think I thought of an example of this the other day when, in terms of, he keeps reinforcing the ego is just coming from scarcity
Mhm.
and it's coming from contradictory aims, which can never be accomplished. That was today's lesson. I
Yep.
don't know my own best interest.
Yeah.
I have contradictory goals, and that's why I'm confused. Well, an example I thought of the other day is that you want to enjoy your food, but you don't want to get fat.
Yeah. That's
Right.
like what Eric was talking about.
Yeah, you got two contradictory aims in your
Right.
mind,
Yeah.
and they seem to be in.
Yeah.
You either got to choose the food or choose skinny.
Yeah.
Those are false choices.
Yeah. Right.
That's a wrong-minded false choice.
Yeah. Right. That's where the ego is fighting itself.
Yeah.
Because that's what it loves to do. It fights itself here or as it projects out there. And it's
Right.
always in conflict.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn.
Yeah.
And this is our last paragraph.
Yeah.
It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, knowledge being one-mindedness, while accurate perception is a stepping stone toward it. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. And I think of it as when I recognize that God is here, the Christ mind is in my heart,
Right.
I can realize I don't need a body.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to have it for a while.
You know where that, well, go ahead.
Okay.
If I remember, I'll bring it up.
Okay, this removes the block entirely, being in right-mindedness. You may ask how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world. That is a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. Remember how he said, you can tell what's real by what does not perish.
Yeah.
It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. That's what we really are. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. So remember how it said, beginning of paragraph 7, the ego literally lives by comparison.
All the while, it thinks it's alone.
Right. Yeah, right. This is its main difference, knowledge. This is the main difference from everything else the mind can grasp. The knowledge and spirit are constant, unchanged, immortal, eternal, infinite. It is God.
So in the sentence, the whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. So that's our goal, is to finally let perception all go, right?
Well, that's God's job, right? He's the one who moves us from right perception to oneness.
Yeah.
So it's not our personal goal.
Right, but perception isn't part of knowledge,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the point I'm trying to make.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And that's, I don't know if this helps, but part of what he's been trying to get us to do is get off the concrete, seemingly concrete, specific physical, and have us take a look at our ideas,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
That's
the
kind of the
whole
movement
course.
he's making here. But he's trying to get us from this concrete, specific physicality to something more abstract,
Which is spirit.
which is spirit. But what it also is recognizing that perception itself is a separation device, because you need a perceiver and that which is perceived. That's why ultimately perception is false and doesn't include knowledge.
That's why it's ultimately temporary,
Right.
but it's a temporary expedient. Corrective perception
Right,
is a temporary expedient.
right. But I'm just saying that perception itself is a separation device.
But
'Cause
Holy
you-
Spirit can use it.
Yeah, right. Right. So, and you can use it when we move off the concrete, physical, and specific to say this is about ideas and concepts that I'm holding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? What's your main takeaway from today? Anyone want to share?
For me, it's the ego is all about comparison and giving to get, and just such a powerful reminder of how complicated we make life.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking the same way when you asked that question, Jan, that my goal is to make this simpler, more simple. This stuff is wonderful, but I find myself, I don't want to get in a position of analysis of everything. You know, if it's appearing in front of me, regardless of what it is, it's not true in the spiritual sense. And I want to make it simple, because when I make it simple is when I have my greatest progress. I had an experience this last week. It was very simple, very beautiful. And I felt that presence, and it made me smile. And when I was in that place, I wasn't trying to solve something or trying to understand an issue. I just relaxed into the moment, into this presence. And it was all really, really smooth and really beautiful. So I'm trying to find myself to simplify this and not get caught up in so much analysis. But you have to do this work to understand the simplicity of it. It's a kind of a paradox, I guess.
Yeah. Shoot for the experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyone else?
I was struck by the title of this section, actually, just looking at it now. The Ego and False Autonomy.
Mm.
The ego's trying to convince us that we're in charge. We've got the responsibility to do it all ourselves. No.
Thank God.
That one sentence,
No, go ahead, Catherine.
it says, thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. I just really got that the ego is an idea
Oh,
Very good.
built on other ideas. You know, it's just building on all these ideas. It's just really appreciated that part and what you guys had to say too.
thank you.
You know, and that whole idea of comparison is
Mhm.
so important,
Right.
because the Holy Spirit uses that
Yeah.
and says, here's how you feel with the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you feel when you give it to the Holy Spirit. Now, which do you really want?
Mm-hmm.
So he can use everything we made.
Yeah. I wonder if Laura has any thought. You want to?
Yeah, I don't know that I have one particular line, but I think it's just a really good illustration of the ego is keeping us on a hamster wheel so that we don't stop and think or don't stop and know. And that, this leap for us is at first faith. I don't know if that ties in with this discussion about belief, right? It's almost, but you fake it until you make it. Right. So like, I remember reading somewhere about like, if you want peace, be peace. So it talked about to have a real and lasting view of abundance is how you can be really charitable. So do I just, hey, I want abundance, so I will give abundance and trust that spirit will back that up. Put its money where its mouth is, right?
Yeah, without fear.
Yeah.
To the extent you can do that without fear, you learn. Yeah. Yeah. And the abundance isn't only physical stuff. It's,
Yeah.
I can afford to forgive. I can afford to overlook that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thank you, guys.
Bless
Thank
you.
you.
Everybody have a
Thanks, everyone.
Great week.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.